Welcome to my YouTube channel at Sci-fi Tales Pules. Please subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. Queen Eleanor sat in her chamber, staring at the soft glow of the fireplace. Outside, the city of Silverford was quiet, but in her heart there was only sorrow. 2 years had passed since her daughter Claire had disappeared during the rebel attack. Every day since, Eleanor had waited for news. She had sent out riders, soldiers, and scouts, but none had returned with hope. Some told her to let go, to accept that Claire was gone forever, but a mother's heart does not stop searching. The night of the attack still haunted her. The rebels had come at sunset, moving through the city like a shadow. They had set fire to the gates and broken into the royal grounds. Eleanor remembered holding Claire's hand as they ran through the halls. There had been shouting, smoke, and the sound of swords clashing. In the chaos, a group of rebels had broken through the guards. They had grabbed Claire and pulled her away before anyone could stop them. Eleanor had screamed her name until her voice was gone, but the rebels vanished into the darkness. Life in Silverford had never been the same. The people still loved their queen, but they could see the sadness in her eyes. As she tried to rule with strength, but every morning began with the same question in her heart. Was Claire still alive? Somewhere far away, was she waiting to be found? On a cold and rainy night, the sound of heavy boots echoed in the castle's main hall. The guards opened the great doors to find a man standing there. His cloak was soaked, his armor scratched and dented. His face was tired, but his eyes were steady. He introduced himself as Daniel Carter, a soldier who had once served in the Royal Guard. He said he had news that could not wait. Eleanor was called to meet him in the hall. She stepped down the marble stairs, her heart pounded. She had heard many false stories before, men who claimed to know what happened to Claire, but were only seeking gold or favor. She studied Daniel's face, looking for signs of deceit, but saw only honesty and exhaustion. Daniel bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I have been looking for your daughter since the night she was taken. I know where she has been." The room grew silent. The guards, the servants, even the torch flames seemed to hold still. Eleanor's lips trembled as she asked him to continue. Daniel spoke slowly, telling her that after the attack, he had followed the rebels' trail for months. He had crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and traveled through dangerous forests. He had fought off thieves and evaded patrols. Finally, far beyond the borders of Silverford, he had found a camp hidden deep in the hills. It was there, locked away in a small cabin, that he saw Claire. Eleanor's heart ached as she listened. She imagined her daughter in that cold place, frightened and alone. She wanted to ask 100 questions, but Daniel kept speaking, explaining how he had worked his way into the camp by pretending to be a wandering fighter. He had gained their trust and waited for the right moment. When the chance came, he took Claire and fled into the night. The journey back had been filled with danger. The rebels had chased them for days, but Daniel knew the land well. He led Claire through hidden paths, keeping her safe. They had little food and no warm shelter, but Daniel never gave up. Every step brought them closer to home. When Daniel finished speaking, Eleanor felt her knees weaken. She wanted to believe every word, but fear still gripped her. "Where is she now?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes softened. "She is safe, Your Majesty." "She is here," Eleanor gasped. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and a small figure stepped inside. She was thinner than Eleanor remembered, her clothes simple and worn, but there was no mistaking her. Claire stood there holding the sapphire pendant her mother had given her on her last birthday, her eyes filled with tears. Eleanor ran across the hall, her arms wrapping tightly around her daughter. For the first time in 2 years, the ache in her heart began to fade. Claire's voice shook as she said, "Mom, I'm home. He rescued me." The words echoed in the hall, and for a moment the whole world seemed to stand still. Daniel stood quietly in the corner of the hall, while Eleanor held her daughter. He felt the weight of the long journey still in his bones, but seeing the Queen and Claire together made every hardship worth it. Claire's face was pressed against her mother's shoulder, her tears soaking into Eleanor's dress. For a long time no one spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the rain outside tapped against the windows. When Eleanor finally pulled back, she held Claire's face in her hands. She looked at her daughter as if afraid she might vanish again. Then her eyes moved to Daniel. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the very beginning." Daniel nodded. His voice was steady, but there was a quiet heaviness in it. He told them how, on the night of the raid, he had been guarding the outer wall. saw the rebels break through and realized they were heading for the royal chambers. He fought his way inside, but by the time he reached the main corridor, Claire had already been taken. The sight of her being dragged away stayed with him every moment after. In the days that followed, while the rest of the guards searched the nearby lands, Daniel chose to go farther. He believed the rebels would take Claire deep into the hills where the army would not follow. He left the safety of the city and began a long pursuit. He tracked broken branches, faint footprints, and ashes from campfires. Often he slept on cold ground, sometimes without food or shelter. Weeks passed, then months. He told them about the first time he saw the rebel camp. It was hidden between two cliffs, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Smoke from their fires rose only at night and disappeared by dawn. Daniel had stayed hidden for days, studying the guards, counting their numbers, and watching their movements. One evening, he saw a small window open on the side of a cabin. There, in the dim light, he caught sight of Claire sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Eleanor held her breath as Daniel spoke. Claire listened to, her eyes wide. She remembered those nights, the cold and the silence, the way she tried to stay brave even when she was afraid.
Oh.
Daniel explained how he had slowly made himself known to the rebels as a wandering fighter. He told them he had no home and no loyalty to any kingdom. At first, they did not trust him, but he offered to hunt for them, to help guard their supplies. Over time, they allowed him closer to the camp. He waited for the right moment. Came one night when the rebels celebrated a successful raid on a merchant convoy. They drank and sang by the fire, their guards distracted. Daniel slipped to the cabin, opened the door, and told Claire to follow him. She was frightened, but when she saw it was him, she nodded. They moved quickly through the darkness. The night was cold, and the moon was hidden by clouds. They had to travel by memory and instinct, avoiding the main paths. The rebels noticed their absence before dawn and began to chase them. Daniel and Claire hid in caves, crossed icy streams, and climbed steep hills. Sometimes they walked for hours without speaking, saving their breath for the climb. He gave her the last of his food and kept watch while she slept. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she listened. Daniel's journey sounded like something from a tale told by firelight, yet she knew it was real. She could see the worn leather of his boots, the small cuts on his hands, and the faint bruises along his arms. Each mark was a sign of the danger he had faced. Claire spoke then, her voice soft but clear. She told her mother how Daniel had never let her give up, even when she thought they would be caught. He made her laugh on the hardest days, reminded her of home, and promised that she would see her mother again. She said that without him she would still be in that cabin, waiting for someone to come. The queen looked at Daniel for a long moment. She saw no pride in his eyes, only quiet relief. He had risked his life not for gold, not for glory, but to keep his word. In that moment, Eleanor knew that she owed him more than she could ever repay. The hall remained silent as the story ended. Outside, the rain began to fade, and a pale light spread across the city. Somewhere, the bells of Silverford began to ring, as if the whole kingdom could feel the change that had come. The castle courtyard was filled with people. Servants, guards, and members of the royal council had gathered after hearing the news. Word had spread quickly through Silverford that the princess had returned. The sound of boots on stone and the soft murmur of voices filled the air. Everyone was waiting to see her. The great wooden gates opened slowly. Daniel walked in first, his cloak still damp from the journey. Behind him, Claire stepped forward, her small hand holding tightly to his. She wore a plain dress, but around her neck hung the sapphire pendant her mother had given her long ago. Her hair was a little tangled from travel, and her cheeks were pale, but her eyes shone with relief. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Many of them had thought they would never see her again. Some covered their mouths in shock, others smiled with tears in their eyes. The guards stood taller, their faces softening as they watched the young princess walk past. At the far end of the courtyard, Queen Eleanor stood waiting. She took a step forward, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Claire's gaze met her mother's, and both began to move faster until they were running toward each other. The moment they met, Eleanor dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her daughter. Claire clung to her mother with all her strength. Her voice broke as she whispered the words she had been holding in for so long. "Mom, I'm home." He rescued me." The courtyard grew silent. Oh. Those closest to them could hear the quiet sobs of the queen as she held her child. Daniel stood a short distance away, watching. I did not want to interrupt their moment. His face was calm, but inside he felt a deep sense of peace. After a while, Eleanor stood and kept one arm around Claire. She turned to the crowd and said, "My daughter is safe. Let this day be remembered." Her voice was strong, but her eyes glistened with tears. The crowd began to cheer. Some clapped, others raised their hands in celebration. Bells from the nearby towers began to ring, their sound carrying far across the city. It was a sound of joy, one that Silverford had not heard in years. Eleanor guided Claire toward the steps leading into the castle. As they passed, people bowed their heads in respect. Daniel followed quietly, keeping his eyes on the path ahead. He was not used to such attention. Many wanted to speak to him, to thank him, but he kept his focus on making sure Claire stayed safe. Inside the castle, the warmth of the great hall wrapped around them. Fires burned in the hearths, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. Servants rushed to bring blankets and warm food. Claire was seated near the fire, and Eleanor stayed close, not letting go of her hand. Daniel stood by the door, unsure if he should stay. The queen noticed and called him forward. "You will not stand in the shadows," she said. "Come here." He stepped forward, feeling the weight of many eyes on him. Eleanor looked at him with deep gratitude. "You brought my daughter home," she said. "No words can match what you have done." Daniel shook his head. "I did what I had to do, Your Majesty. I promised myself I would not return without her." Claire looked up at him then, her eyes filled with warmth. "You kept me safe," she said softly. "You never gave up." The queen rested a hand on his shoulder. "From this day forward, you will be honored in this kingdom," she told him. "Silverford will know your name." For the rest of the evening, the hall was filled with quiet conversation and soft laughter. The sound of the rain outside faded, replaced by the crackle of the fires. Daniel found a seat near the wall, watching as Eleanor and Claire spoke together. He could see how much they had missed each other, how every word they shared seemed to heal a wound in their hearts. That night, as the city celebrated, Daniel felt something he had not felt in a long time. He was home too, in a way. And for the first time since the night of the raid, the castle felt whole again. The news of Claire's return spread through the city faster than the wind. By morning, every street in Silverford was alive with excitement. Merchants left their stalls to tell neighbors, children ran through alleys shouting the news, and old friends hugged each other in joy. For 2 years, the city had carried a shadow in its heart. Now that shadow was lifting. The bells in the central tower rang from dawn until noon. Their deep, joyful sound reached every corner of the kingdom. Farmers heard it from their fields, fishermen from their boats, and travelers from the roads. All knew what it meant. The princess was home. Inside the castle, the halls were busy. Servants prepared great tables of food, arranging baskets of fresh bread, roasted meats, and ripe fruit. Musicians tuned their instruments for a feast to be held that evening. It was not often that the kingdom celebrated with such open joy. Daniel moved quietly through the halls, not used to the attention he was receiving. People stopped him often to thank him. Some bowed, others clasped his hand. A few called him a hero. Each time, Daniel answered the same way. "I only did what was right." He meant it. He had not gone after Claire for glory or reward. He had done it because he could not stand by, knowing she was out there alone. Eleanor stayed close to Claire all morning. She wanted to hear every detail of her time away, but she did not push her. Instead, she listened when Claire was ready to speak, and held her hand when she grew quiet. There was a softness in Eleanor's face that the court had not seen in years. In the afternoon, Eleanor called Daniel to join her in the council chamber. The long table was covered in maps, scrolls, and reports. Members of the council sat along the sides, their expressions serious yet warm toward him. Eleanor stood at the head of the table. "This man," she said to the council, "has done what no army could. Alone, he found my daughter and brought her home. He faced dangers we cannot imagine and asked for nothing in return." Daniel felt every eye on him, but he stayed calm. "Your Majesty," he said, "I made a promise to myself the night she was taken. I would not stop until she was safe. That was my only goal." One of the council members, an older man with a kind smile, spoke up. "And now that she is home, what will you do?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I will serve the kingdom in whatever way I am needed," he replied. "If that means guarding the gates, I will guard them. If it means riding into danger again, I will ride." Eleanor nodded. "Then know this, you will always have a place here. My family will never forget what you have done." That evening, the feast began. The great hall glowed with candlelight, and the air was filled with the rich scent of roasted food and the sound of music. Long tables were lined with people from all walks of life, nobles in fine clothes, soldiers in their armor, and townsfolk who had been invited to share in the celebration. Claire sat beside her mother, smiling more freely than she had since her return. From time to time, she looked at Daniel across the table and gave him a small nod, as if to remind him she was still grateful. As the night went on, people told stories of bravery and hope. Some spoke of the night of the raid, others of the long search, but most wanted to hear Daniel's journey in his own words. He spoke simply, without adding any extra glory to himself. He told them about the forests, the hills, and the dangerous paths. He spoke of how Claire had stayed strong and how her courage had inspired him to keep going. By the time the music softened and the candles burned low, the hall felt lighter than it had in years. People left with full hearts, knowing they had witnessed something rare. Eleanor stood at the balcony after the feast, looking over the city lights. Daniel joined her. The night air was cool, and the sound of distant laughter drifted up from the streets. "Tonight the kingdom feels whole again," Eleanor said quietly. Daniel nodded. It was worth every step. In the streets below, the people of Silverford continued to celebrate. For them, this was not just the return of a princess. It was proof that even in the darkest times, hope could still find its way home. The days after the feast were calm, but they were filled with meaning. The castle, once filled with quiet and heavy air, now felt alive again. Laughter could be heard in the gardens, and music sometimes drifted from the halls. For the first time in 2 years, Queen Eleanor slept without waking in the night from fear for her daughter. Daniel stayed in the castle, though he did not take part in the daily life of the court. He spent most of his time in the training yard, helping the guards improve their skills. Many of them respected him even before they met him, but now they looked to him as a leader. When young soldiers asked him about his journey, he told them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to keep moving despite it. Sometimes she would sit on the edge of the training yard, watching quietly. Other times she would bring him bread or fruit from the kitchen. They talked often, not just about what had happened, but about what was ahead. Claire told him she wanted to learn how to ride faster, how to use a bow, and how to defend herself. Daniel promised he would teach her. One afternoon, Eleanor found them in the garden. Daniel was showing Claire how to hold a wooden practice sword. The queen watched for a moment before stepping closer. "I see you are keeping your promise," Eleanor said.
Ow.
Daniel lowered the practice sword and bowed his head slightly. "I told you I would protect her, and I will, for as long as I live." Eleanor's gaze softened. "You have done more than protect her. You've given her hope and strength. That is something even I could not do in these last years." That evening, Eleanor invited Daniel to join her for a walk along the castle walls. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. From above, they could see the streets filled with life. Merchants were closing their stalls, children were chasing each other, and the smell of cooking fires rose into the air. "When I thought my daughter was gone forever," Eleanor said, "there were moments I almost gave in to despair. I had wealth, power, and armies, yet none of it could bring her back. But you, with nothing but your own will, did what I could not." Daniel looked out at the horizon. "I did not do it alone. She never stopped believing that she would see you again." That belief kept both of us moving. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of the wind around the stone walls, the only noise. Finally, Eleanor stopped and faced him. "Silverford owes you a debt that can never be repaid," she said. "I want you to stay here, not just as a soldier, but as someone I trust completely. You will serve as the captain of my guard, and you will have my full confidence." Daniel hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more certain," Eleanor replied. From that day forward, Daniel served not only as the captain of the guard, but also as a trusted friend to the royal family. He continued to train the soldiers and teach Claire skills that would help her in the years ahead. The people of Silverford often spoke of him as the man who brought their princess home. Seasons changed, and life in the city moved forward. Yet, the memory of that stormy night when Daniel had arrived at the castle gates never faded. It was told in markets, around fires, and in the quiet corners of taverns. Children grew up hearing about the soldier who crossed mountains and forests to keep a promise. One spring evening, Claire stood with Daniel in the courtyard. The air was warm and the scent of blooming flowers surrounded them. She looked at him and said, "You know, I think you saved more than my life. You saved my family." Daniel smiled. "You gave me a home." The bells of the city rang in the distance, their sound carrying over the rooftops. It was a reminder of the day joy had returned to Silverford. And in that moment, both Daniel and Claire knew that no matter what challenges came, they would face them together. The promise Daniel had made in the shadows of the rebel camp was still alive, and it always would be. For in the heart of the kingdom, where hope had once seemed lost, it had found its way home again. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.